Welcome to Beyond the Page, the official podcast of Choice, the magazine of professional coaching, where we bring you amazing insights and in-depth features that you just won't find anywhere else. I'm your host, Gary Schleifer, and I'm excited to expand your learning as we dive into the latest articles, have a chat with the brilliant authors behind them, and uncover the learnings that are transforming the coaching world. Join our vibrant community of coaching professionals as we explore groundbreaking ideas, share expert tips and techniques, and make a real difference in our clients' lives, because that's really what we want to do, right? And we love what we're doing. But just saying, please remember this is your go-to resource for all things coaching. Let's dive in. In today's episode, I'm speaking with Dr. William Bergquist, who forthwith we will call Bill, because that's how I know him, who's the author of an article in our latest issue, Coaching Education in Flux, The Ongoing Evolution of a Dynamic Field. His article is entitled Training a la Mode, Challenges and Choices in Coaching Training Programs. A little bit about Bill. He's a PhD, an educator, a coach, a consultant in the fields of psychology and management, and has worked with 1,000+ leaders and organizations throughout the world, and is the author of more than, wait for it, 50 books. I know, because I've carried a few of those books around for him. We have history. He recently co-authored books on recently co-authored books are The Arc of Leadership and The Crises of Expertise and Belief. And he co-curates two major digital libraries, Library for Professional Coaching and the Library of Professional Psychology. Bill served for more than 35 years as the president of the Professional School of Psychology, which is an international graduate school. Bill, thank you so much for joining me today.
Good being with you, Gary.
And
Yes.
we've known each other for how long now? Come on, it's been, right?
Ever since we're putting bookshelves together up in beautiful downtown Toronto. Yes.
Adler School, yeah. Well, and before that, we worked together in the Library of Professional Coaching. I joined a few.
Yes, you helped found it. You helped found that library.
I keep forgetting that part, but
Yes,
I've done all the work since, so I'm going to give you most of the credit on that.
I will take some of it along with Susie Pomerantz,
Exactly, our dear Susie.
Yes.
Well, good. And it's been a long time coming that we have you writing for us and on a podcast. So welcome, welcome. I'm excited. Now,
Terrific.
What inspired you to write for this particular issue? And by the way, did you like the treatment with the ice cream thing? I thought that was kind of very Maine.
Very nice. Very nice. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Choice Magazine does, you folks do some wonderful thing. The images, it's a delight. I mean, you truly are the coaching magazine. I mean, you're
We're it. Yeah.
So what inspired me to write this article?
Yeah.
Several things. First, let me just brag a little bit about myself.
You go right ahead.
I've actually, in the areas of coaching and in the areas of training, I've actually had 3 lives, not 10 like a cat, but at least 3. Real quickly, I initially started doing a lot of training in higher education. And I'm often considered one of the founders of a field called faculty development. I did some of the very first training of faculty members and administrators in higher education. Then I moved over to doing a lot of training with leaders all over the world, leadership development, management development, etc. Then my third career, where I met you, was about training of coaches. And in all 3, those 50 books you're talking about, a lot of that were books about education and how to teach faculty members, and books about leadership and how to do leadership development, and books about training of coaches. So when you asked me if I'd be interested, I said, sure, I'd love to. And I'd love to share a few of the ideas.
Well, and it would kind of be a missing because you are one of us from way in the beginning of the coaching industry, and it would be missing if we didn't have you here. So, and you didn't mention a few of your other accomplishments, like you were the co-creator of the Journal of Professional
I
Coaching.
was co-creator of the International Journal of Coaching and Organizations.
Yeah, and you had some
And
events that you were spearheaded, and
yes, and we did the coaching summit, and I've gotten into a lot of mischief, sometimes with you, sir.
I know the new. What was the one we just did last year before, just after COVID, 2022, was
No,
new
that was
executive coaching
the
summit
summit. Yeah, executive coaching
with our
summit.
friend Susie.
Yes,
I know.
and a bunch of other people, dear people, getting together actually here in Maine,
Yeah,
on the coast of Maine. So yeah, it's
yeah.
wonderful.
Wonder was a wonderful time. Bill, I want to refer to your article. You very clearly spoke about different modalities of training, not just for coaches, but training in general. And one of the things that really stood out that I want to ask about is, well, so what are the best ways to ensure that the perspectives and practices introduced in a training session are eventually and actually used by a training participant? How do you get the glue?
Well, I think, and I wrote a bit about this, that most of the time people measure the success of a training program based on the amount of information that's conveyed. You dump a lot of stuff is better than dumping a little bit of stuff. But what we know is the amount of information is one thing. The second dimension is the retention of the information.
Yeah,
A
true.
lot of research shows that most training programs within 6 months, 70 to 80% of what was quote unquote learned has now been lost, forgotten. And even more important than retention is the transfer or the use. This is what you've been talking about. Does
Mhm.
this stuff ever get used?
Yeah.
And the percent, that's hard to measure, but the percent would be very low. And so you end up having training programs all over the place in which very little of it gets used later on. And part of that, and then I'll get into specific things, is when we're looking at mature learners, which is what we're doing.
Yeah, exactly.
There's not a lot of 10-year-old coaches. There probably should be.
Yeah.
They're probably smarter than
They'll
that,
probably be better than us.
but they're often folks that are, a little bit older.
Yeah.
And what we know, a dear colleague of mine, Ellie Greenberg, used to talk about newly minted MBA folks are theory rich and experience poor.
Mm.
They've just gone through a whole program where they've learned all the different models of leadership and they learn all this stuff, but they have absolutely no experience. Conversely, the kind of people we're talking about who do coaching tend to be experience rich and theory poor.
Mm.
And so one of the things that's important to look at is we're not starting with people who have no experience. The mug is not empty.
Yeah.
The mug is at least half full, and usually it's already completely full. And so when we pour new stuff in, it goes off the mug, it spills all over the place. So when we talk about modes of training, I think in the article I talk about 4 different modes, and this is a gross oversimplification,
Mm.
but I think there's an important concept here about what is most effective. So the classic mode, I call it mode 1, is essentially where a program that's intensive and residential.
Mm-hmm.
That's the classic thing, such as executive MBA programs, uh, the Rolls Royce programs, where you go off and you spend an intense period of time, and mostly it's about leadership or management.
Mm-hmm.
Very few programs, I've looked into it, very few coaching programs are ever Rolls Royce kind of programs. What's important to look at there is that the amount that is learned, the amount of information conveyed, is very high. Part of the reason for that is an important concept in all this stuff has to do with stuff my hero Kurt Lewin wrote about years ago, which is unfreezing.
Mm-hmm.
people are not open to learning. Boom. There needs to be some unfreezing. There needs to be a setup for the learning. We need to present them with a puzzle. We need to present them with a case study. We need to find out what are their concerns so they can unfreeze and get ready for the learning. The fortunate thing in kind of residential intensive programs, they can be absolutely rich. The unfreezing occurs, and then they're living, breathing, eating, everything having to do with whatever the concepts are. It's a wonderful way to get a lot of information out. However, it's horrible in terms of the actual retention of the material after it's done, and even worse in terms of the transfer, the use of the learning in real life.
Well, yeah.
So we can say a lot more about that, but most coaching programs don't use that first mode. Mode 2 is very commonly used, and that's what's called distributed residential. That's where people come in and they do a 3 days or 2-day program, and then they go back home, and then they do another 2 days and they go back home, et cetera, et cetera. That's very common. For instance, we find like the Hudson Institute, Newfield, University of Miami, Georgetown, a lot of the kind of
Coaches Training Institute,
programs.
Coaches Training Institute, where I did my training back in the day, did it that way. Now
Yes.
it's totally online.
Right. So those were classic things. And often you can get a certification with these kind of programs. A lot of ICF certified programs traditionally were of this model. Now, what's interesting is that the amount that is learned is not quite as much, because every time that the people are reconvened, there has to be an unfreezing that occurs. It takes time to unfreeze. And so you have a 2 or 3 day program, you're ready to really roll on it, day 2, and you've already lost a day. However, the retention, a lot of research shows the retention is better.
Greater, yeah.
And transfer is pretty good too, because in between the sessions, it'd be very common that they do coaching. There's they have a support group that goes with it. So the retention is retention and transfer a whole lot better than mode 1. Okay. Is this all right? I'm just kind of going through these quickly.
You know what? And it's excellent. And one thing I want to add, I want to ask your perspective on is, you talked about unfreezing, totally makes sense. But there's also this thing I've experienced called reentry.
Yes.
You go to a program, you unfreeze, you try and make room in your mug for more information and more learning. You go back into the world, and especially in the field of coaching, I found it's almost like you're a zombie. You're talking another language to the world, and they don't understand you. And you have to like, oh my gosh, that's right. I'm not in my coach training program anymore.
So let me respond to a couple things. First of all, what I think is critical at the end of any residential program, whether it be dispersed over time or intensive, is the last part of it should be preparing people to go back home.
Right.
So you actually, I always do things. I say, okay, so let's rehearse what you're going to tell your spouse or what you're going to tell your friends about what just happened. And what is that about? How are you going to sustain some of this material? Tell me 3 things you sustain. One of the things I like doing is I like doing the 6-month letter. So I have them write a letter to themselves 6 months in the future. So they're saying, okay, Gary. So Gary's writing the letter. Okay, here's some of the things you learned. Have you done any of that over this last 6 months? Now, Gary, I know all your defense mechanisms because I'm you. So here's the things you usually do to wiggle out of this stuff. Did you wiggle out of it, or and they seal it envelope, with the envelope, and I hold them. And in 6 months, I send them the letter. One of the powerful things, first of all, they say, well, who the hell is this person? They said, I've seen that handwriting somewhere.
That handwriting, I've done this before. I've had that experience where I get this letter from me.
Yeah, it's very powerful. The other thing, of course, is practice what you preach. That is, when people go back home, they should have a coach about their coaching. How critical that is that they can, that they have someone they work with, or a support group where they share with each other and keep honest. I often will have clips from the actual session, and so if a support group meets, they review some of the stuff that was taught or written material. So those are some things, I think, what you're saying. And part of it, of course, that's unfreezing. And then Lewin would say there's a learning that occurs, hopefully. And there's the refreezing. And what you're talking about, the transition back home, is the refreezing. But hopefully it's not refreezing back to what it was before.
Because as my dad, the butcher, said, you can only refreeze meat once. But in your case, we've cooked it and then you can freeze it again.
Yes.
So
yeah, no, so thank you. No, I mean those are some of the critical kind of issues.
yeah.
And if you're thoughtful, like you're talking about, thoughtful about the transition back to the real world, you're more likely to find retention and transfer.
Wow, great.
And you're also you're more likely to find that your relationship with your significant other isn't destroyed.
Don't coach your spouse is the learning I always got.
Well, and also, once again, you just if the program was successful, you just had an affair. I mean, you kind of fell in love with other people, or you fell in love with ideas.
Yeah.
And your spouse, your significant other, is likely to say, "What the hell happened?"
Yeah. What Kool-Aid did you drink over there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the ways you avoid all this stuff
is you take your
as you
spouse
say,
along.
you move with a little low. The mode 3 is online programs.
Right.
And what you were talking about, Gary, earlier, a lot of programs are going over to online. Obviously, part of the reason is convenience. They tend to be less expensive. People can fit it in around their busy schedule.
No travel.
So that was original, like Coach U was originally, and then places like Capella University, many universities, traditional universities, Purdue, for instance, a number of them have online coach training programs.
Right.
Now, there's several things about online programs that make them potentially effective. First of all, many of them begin with an in-person orientation program, so that you start with bringing people together in person for a day or two. So you begin to build a community. And so there's some unfreezing, kind of in general unfreezing that occurs. I think online programs that begin with this kind of orientation in person, I think are, from when I've talked to people, are often much more effective than if you begin just with online. Or you may do online first couple times and then come one time together in person.
Yeah.
The other thing is the idea of the support group. That seems to be critical, that there's a group they meet with in between their sessions. And third, almost every one of these online programs have some sort of guidebook, some sort of book that goes along with it, supplemental materials or videos or the technology.
Yeah.
And so that orientation, support, and guidebooks, I think, are really critical in terms of, so some of the people who are watching this video, if they're setting up programs, if you're going to set up an online program, those three are really important. And what about the benefits? The amount, middle, you're not learning as much as the residential intensive, but you're learning a fair amount. Retention's fairly good. There's evidence saying it's fairly good. Transfer, on the other hand, tends to be pretty high.
Interesting.
Because what it means is you're getting that stuff and then you can almost immediately try it out.
Right.
So of those three modes, probably the transfer is as good or better than certainly than any of in the distributed program.
Any idea why that is?
Excuse me?
Any idea why that is?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's part, and we'll see even more of it when we get into the fourth mode, the just in time. But part of what it is that typically the when you have an online program,
Mhm.
the length of time between what you're learning and trying out and you're using it is really quite short. And, you may do it a few hours later, the next day or two. It tends to be much tighter.
Right.
You're not having to do with all the logistics of traveling and coming back. It's right there. The setting, you're in your office, and if you're coaching, you're either in your office, someone else's. It's much closer to the real world.
Yeah. Good points. Yeah. Thank you.
So you're not having an affair,
Although the language
but
has changed and
you are having a flirtation.
I love it.
Then there's the fourth, and the fourth is really quite interesting. This is, I think, going to become much more common. And that's often goes by several names, but let's call it just-in-time programs. That is, for instance, several years ago, I was working with a finance company, and I was meeting with the president, and we were talking about their professional development program.
Mhm.
And he points to his computer and he says, "That's our professional development program. We have a whole set of modules and different pieces. And I trust my employees when they're ready to learn something. We got something they can learn right there. So 2 hours from now, I'm going to be dealing with a really difficult coach.
Mhm.
There's a module there, brief module, 10 minutes, 15 ways to deal with the difficult client or whatever. Or a tree just fell and messed up the internet. I needed a 3-minute program about what to do.
Right.
The other way often it's talked about is on-demand learning.
Right.
That is that what it is that when people need something, they know there's a place they can get it. Now, what happens is that the amount that is learned may be kind of low, but the retention is medium or high, and the transfer is also very high because you say I need something right now, and you get it, and
Yeah.
then you use it. That's called
Well,
high
you have
transfer.
an immediate need and you go do it. I'm more concerned about, people signing up for a course and then they never use it. I'm that kind of person. I'm not self-motivated to take these courses, right?
Well, then you're bringing up an important point. For this just in time or on demand, three huge assumptions go with that. One is that the learner is self-motivated,
Mm-hmm.
like you're saying. Second, they're self-directed. And third, and this is critical, know what they need to know.
Mm.
It's back to the old Donald Rumsfeld thing, is that, the things you know and you need to know it. There are other things you don't know and you need to know it. There are other things you don't know that you need.
Right?
I mean, and then the finals, you don't know that you don't, all
You
those.
don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, so the other critical thing on this whole piece on just in time is the modules or whatever you're going to build it's really challenging.
Hmm.
You need stuff that really is uh, easily digestible, but not watered down.
Hmm.
And that's really tricky. How do you get that? And it has to be updated.
Constantly.
So it's a lot of the just-in-time stuff is old.
Yeah.
It's been
So by
sitting
the
there.
time it's made, by the time it's put up there.
So, so part of it is something that's not available yet, though choice is close to it, and a library professional coaching is close to it, is resource banks, places where people can go
Mhm.
for just in time.
Yeah.
So, so that they can go up to, I keep seeing those wonderful articles that Pat Williams did that are so wonderful for people that are in particular difficult times.
Mm.
And so I think we're at the edge of recognizing that that's kind of where things are going.
Right.
On the other hand, there's no certifications in those. For
Yeah.
the second and third modes all have certifications. This fourth one doesn't.
Mhm.
So it's a bit tricky how that works. So
Well, I've had the experience of doing the just-in-time training, but it was directed, like I was told I had to do it in order to get my certification to get clients. So I have had an experience in an organization that said, you want to have clients to coach, you have to go through this whole training. It was a horrible system though, but I did it. And you got your little, progress report and next one. And to your point, it was bite-sized, it was easy to retain, easy to move forward and answer the questions and get some understanding of what it is that they wanted you to. It was more about teaching a framework of coaching rather than how to coach.
yeah, and the tricky thing with a lot of these, that's where I mentioned about superficial. I'm enough of a psychologist to just to feel the distinction between symptom relief and real treatment are important.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of the stuff, I mean, we find it in the library of professional coaching.
Mhm.
Many of the articles that are most popular are ones, 5 bullet points or 10 ways to do this, 10 things to this. And a lot of those, if you're using it with a client, there's kind of immediate symptom relief, but it doesn't really get at deeper issues.
Right.
So that's, I think, is part of the challenging thing. Those are not bad things to have. I'm glad we have them. I'm glad we have them in the library. On the other hand, my stuff, my 30, 50 page tomes are wonderful, but no one reads them. I find it gratifying. So there's something in between. And what we need is a broad range.
Mm.
So one of the things we do not have in the library, and I think it's not in choice, and I don't know where else it is, are what are some pathways? Where is some clearinghouse to say, if these are the kind of issues doing, here's a couple of things you
Yeah.
can look.
Yeah.
Yeah, we really need, and it may be some things, Gary, you and I have talked about a coaching quad that we're working,
Yeah.
Susie Pomerantz and I are working on.
Hmm.
We need places that are neutral, where they're not pushing a specific approach.
Yeah.
They're having a variety, which Choice has been wonderful with. That people can say, this is some good stuff, almost like a consumer report
Yeah.
for coaching tools.
Yeah. Well, that would be. It sounds to me like, you add hashtags to your article and that's what shows up when you do a Google search, that kind of thing. So yeah, a repository that's searchable.
Yeah.
Take some work to get it to determine what the article will be about and to set it up. But I'm sure with AI now, it can read it and probably give you all the hashtags you need.
Yes.
Don't
Yeah.
forget that.
We're clearly at the start of that. That's why I'm saying that fourth mode and what it's going to look like 3 or 5 years from now, who knows? But
Mhm.
it's much more likely that the training program you go to is called the computer or the handheld device or whatever you got to use, and will require self-motivation, self-direction.
Yeah. Yeah.
It'll
So,
require
so
knowing
what,
something about what you don't know.
yeah. What's your favorite of the four modes?
But I love mode one.
Well, you
uh,
would because you had a physical school. Was it in California?
yes, but though our students are all over the world. Uh, so in many ways, it's probably mode two. When I had my coach training program and obviously my doctoral programs that I ran for many, many years, there's something extraordinary about being with other people for a period of time with
Yeah,
the
no kidding.
shared excitement and everything. particularly if there's diversity. I mean, one of the things that's wonderful, I think, is Mode 2 training programs where you bring people together from around the world, which I had the privilege of doing. I mean, we had,
Yeah.
in my own graduate school, we had people typically at a gathering, we call them, from 6, 7 different countries all over the world. And there's richness in that.
Yeah.
So truly international coaching programs, I think, are a blessing.
When I think about it, after having read the article in this conversation, I would lean more towards the distributed residential mode 2 with a just-in-time online training component for retention,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yes.
Something
Yeah.
like that. So some sort of hybrid of them. Yeah. And then you just don't know what's going to bring up what AI is going to bring up in the future as well, right? You don't know what impact that's going to have on training. At this point, augmented is really helping. I see a lot of people saying how to develop courses using AI. What I haven't seen is AI actually delivering them, right? Like some computer or something like that.
And there's a tendency, two things. There's a tendency for AI still to be fairly superficial, to offer platitudes. Because in some way, because you and I both have in our writing now, increasingly we're having suggestions being made about the completion of the sentence.
Yeah.
Usually they're kind of trivial suggestions.
Yeah.
Uh, but I am anyway, so
Yeah. No, I hear what you're saying. It's a couple things come to mind. Number one is what you said about that community, that gathering of energies, entities, physical bodies. And when people are worried about AI taking over, well, yeah, it's going to be augmented. There's going to be it supports the democratization of coaching, but it's never going to take over this kind of thing where we may not be physically together, but two human beings having a conversation. Like, do we really want to get rid of that? And to me, the answer is no. It just means you have to keep upping your game and you have to be more relevant than an AI.
and I think in a piece of this about this residential dispersed is the real learning occurs not with the content delivered, it's with the processing of what happens in that gathering with the content. A real quick story. I was hired at a place called Witchy, which is it's called a compact agency, and I've worked with the 13 Western American states. Like a treaty organization, but it's among states. And I was running this magnificent program called the Management of Innovation. Unbelievable. A lot of training, a lot of preparation. We ran that program, and it was an absolute disaster.
Oh my.
Well, what was interesting is somewhere in the middle of it, when we recognized it wasn't working, we stopped and we began to process what was going on. Because this was itself an innovation, and it was innovation that wasn't working very well. So years later, I'm in the Salt Lake City airport, and there's someone that wanders in to where I was, who had been a participant in the program. I immediately hid behind a plant, a potted plant. But he found me out. And, oh God. And he came up and he said, Bill, I just wanted you to know that program you ran was the best program I've ever been to about the challenges of innovation. The way you introduced the mayhem, the way you introduced all the mess, and then we processed it was a great, great strategy to use. And I said, thank you. Yeah, we worked just like we wanted it to,
Yeah. Well,
But the notion, and where was a classic one of this is back after World War II, Kurt Lewin and a group of people convened this major conference about anti-Semitism in America. And like all great conferences, they had speakers there, and everyone sat in the audience going, oh. And the speakers would pontificate about anti-Semitism and all that. And then at the end of the day, all the leaders got together and talked about what had happened. Well, there was a woman in the audience who went up to Kurt Lewin and said, do you mind if I sit in on your sessions at the end of the day? Oh, the other people, oh, and Kurt Lewin is a wonderful set, and is this deep German accent said, yeah, good idea. So she sat in, and they talked about all these things, and then she got and said, excuse me, I don't think that's what happened. And pretty soon, it was a 5-day conference. The next day, a bunch of other people sat in. And by the middle of the week, most of the formal sessions were thrown out, and they were processing.
That's brilliant.
And it's from there that the thing called T groups, training groups, began. And out of that, in the West Coast, came sensitivity training. What was interesting, sensitivity training was initially not about about feelings sensitive, about sensitivity to the interpersonal relationships.
Right. Yeah.
But it was the processing. So part of what I think is critical in any program, it's much more difficult modes 3 and 4, but to not just have whatever you're introducing, but to process it.
Processing, of course, that's how retention happens, right? Yeah. Yeah. Bill, absolutely delightful. I have tons more questions, but I don't have tons more time. So we're gonna start wrapping up. Speaking of might not be processing, but actionable items, what would you like our audience to do as a result of this article, your article in this conversation?
A couple things. First of all, something I hadn't mentioned, but I'll do it real quick, is you need to know something about why the participants are coming to the program. The pre-work. Once again, I ran a major program with a utility company in Medon, Kansas, and the participants were horrible. They were not motivated. They were resistant. And at one point, my colleague and I sat down with a couple of them. We were kind of honest, was processing. I said, well, why in the hell are you here? They said, we're not meant to be here. We were here as punishment because we messed things up.
Yeah.
It was wrong, but they were sent because they were considered the high potentials. And no one ever told them. They put a lot of money was going on. They tell them you're there because you're terrific, not because you need to be cured. So part of it is getting a sense of why people are there. So we talked about the end of a program, processing, working on planning for what are you going to do when you get back home. You need to also at the start of the program or even before the start, find out why people are there. Why are you here? What is it? What are your aspirations?
I have that happen so many times in my coaching intro calls. I say, right, so how did you find out about coaching? How did you get enrolled in this program? But what's funny is some people just like, I have no idea. They just said go and I went. They had no idea what coaching was. It was being paid for by the company. And here they were, and they were an absolute delight. You had a ripe opportunity to educate them on what coaching is and what it isn't, and what, and reminder to them that the commitment that you'll have the best experience ever working with me as your coach. Well, anybody, all of our fellow coaches. So you said you had something else to
part of, by the way, I like what you were just talking about. The other thing I was just going to do was what we've already talked about, which is that I think one of the things to take away from this is if you're involved in the design of a coach training program, be thinking about the mixture of these modes.
Yeah.
I mean, once again, if you're going to do an online program, why not early on have people come together?
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily mean it's the very first event, by the way.
No, it doesn't have to
My
be.
doctoral
No.
program, our doctoral program, one of our people said, having been online with some of these people around the world, when we met in person, it was like I knew them very well, and we could immediately, the unfreezing part of just relationships. So mix some things up, and Gary, you were talking about that. You were
Yeah.
saying, what if we combine some of these things?
Yeah.
So part of the reason I'm mentioning all four of these is each of these has strength and each of these have weaknesses.
Yeah.
Why not mix them up a bit?
Yeah. Great idea. I look forward to it. Maybe you're going to do that. Ha! I think you,
Ah,
in your, hold on, you've got like at least another 6 lives left. You've only talked about 3, so 7. Let's put 7.
well, my life now has to do with a bucket list and things I want to finish.
Ah,
And part of it is I'm writing 3 books that are history of my own family.
oh, wow.
And that's the classic thing. We know late in life, and
Mhm.
I am late in my life. Part of it is finding new understanding, appreciation for our own parents, and telling a history for our family. So my own journey now, my fourth life right now is, in addition to writing several big books, I'm also working, on family history. So
Oh, and it's funny you should say that because I don't call it a bucket list because I don't want to kick the bucket. I got too much to do. But I have a dream book, so it's got over 100 dreams in it that I want to accomplish in my lifetime. And I happen to be working on the ancestry section of our family. And my dad, before he passed, wrote some memoirs, and I'm editing those with the hopes of putting it in a book with some of the pictures that he has of his family. So we're on the same page, my friend. Listen, we have to wrap. What's the best way for our listeners to reach you, should they wish to, or you want them to?
well, probably the best thing is that our school still exists. We're no longer offer degree programs, but we're involved in a lot of research,
Mhm.
writing, scholarship, a whole bunch of stuff. So if you write to me, care of the professionals.
Well, folks, here's an example of technology at its worst. Uh, Bill can be reached through the Library of Professional Coaching. And I'm going to wrap up this by saying thank you so much for joining us for this Beyond the Page episode. For more episodes, subscribe via your favorite podcast app. If you're not a subscriber to Choice Magazine, you can sign up for free or digital issue by scanning our QR code up here or going to choice-online.com and clicking the Sign Up Now button. I'm Gary Schleifer. Enjoy the journey of mastery. Bye, Bill. Too funny.